It all started innocently enough. After being single for what felt like an eternity, I finally met someone who made my heart skip a beat. His name was Jake, and he was everything I'd ever dreamed of: charming, attentive, and with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We hit it off immediately, and soon we were spending every spare moment together. For 3 blissful months, my life felt like a fairy tale. Jake surprised me with flowers at work, cooked me dinner on lazy Sundays, and always knew exactly what to say to make me laugh. I found myself falling hard and fast, opening up to him in ways I never had with anyone else before. But then, without warning, everything changed. One day, Jake simply vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, nothing. His phone went straight to voicemail, his social media accounts disappeared, and he stopped showing up at his usual haunts. It was as if he'd been erased from existence. At first, I was worried sick. I called hospitals, filed a missing persons report, and reached out to every mutual friend we had. But as days turned into weeks with no sign of Jake, my concern slowly morphed into a gnawing sense of unease. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't even imagine. It started with a text message from an unknown number. "Missing me yet?" it read, sending a chill down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just a wrong number, but deep down, I knew better. That was only the beginning. Soon, my phone was bombarded with messages, each more unsettling than the last. "You look beautiful in that red sweater today," one said on a day I'd worn exactly that. "Sweet dreams," another taunted, seconds after I'd turned off my bedroom light. It was clear, someone was watching me, someone who knew my every move. But it wasn't just messages. I'd come home to find things slightly out of place. A chair moved, a window left ajar, my favorite mug in the wrong cabinet. Small things, easy to dismiss, but they added up to a terrifying realization. Someone had been in my home. The feeling of being watched became constant, an oppressive weight that followed me everywhere. I'd catch glimpses of a shadowy figure in my peripheral vision, only for it to vanish when I turned to look. The creak of a floorboard in an empty house, the sensation of breath on the back of my neck when I was alone. My world had become a waking nightmare. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that stress was making me imagine things. But then I saw it, a face in the crowd, familiar yet twisted with malice. It was there for just a second before disappearing into the sea of people, but it was enough. I knew then with chilling certainty that Jake wasn't missing. He was hunting me. As the days wore on, my fear gave way to a simmering anger. How dare he do this to me? I decided to fight back, to reclaim my life from this invisible tormentor. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and even hired a private investigator to track down Jake's true identity. But my stalker was always one step ahead. The cameras would mysteriously malfunction, capturing nothing but static during crucial moments. The investigators' leads all turned cold, as if Jake had never existed in the first place. It was maddening, feeling so helpless in my own life. One night, driven to desperation, I set a trap. I announced loudly on the phone that I was going out, then hid in my closet, a baseball bat clutched in my trembling hands. For hours I waited in silence, every creak and groan of the house setting my nerves on edge. Just as I was about to give up, I heard it, the soft click of my front door opening. Footsteps, achingly familiar, made their way through my home. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The bedroom door creaked open, and I held my breath, muscles coiled to spring. But before I could make my move, a voice spoke, sending ice through my veins. "Oh, sweetheart," Jake's voice crooned. "Did you really think you could outsmart me? I know you better than you know yourself." The closet door flew open, and I found myself face to face with the man I thought I'd loved. But the eyes that met mine were cold, empty, devoid of any humanity. In that moment, I realized the true horror of my situation. The man I'd fallen for had never really existed at all. I swung the bat with all my might, but Jake was faster. He dodged, grabbing my wrist and twisting until I dropped my weapon. As we grappled, he spoke in a voice that was at once familiar and utterly alien. "You should have just let me love you," he hissed, his grip tightening painfully. "We could have been so happy together." Somehow, I managed to break free, bolting for the door. But Jake was always there, blocking my path, herding me like a cat toying with a mouse. It became clear that this was a game to him, one he'd played many times before. "You're not the first, you know," he taunted, circling me. "But you could be the last, if you just accept what we have." As we danced this deadly waltz through my home, the truth spilled out of him like poison. Jake was no ordinary stalker. He was a seasoned predator, selecting his victims with care, molding himself into their perfect partner, only to reveal his true nature when they were in too deep. The realization made me sick to my stomach. In a desperate move, I feigned surrender, letting him pull me close. "That's it," he murmured, stroking my hair. "I knew you'd understand eventually." But as his guard lowered, I struck. I brought my knee up hard, then shoved him with all my strength. As he stumbled, I saw my chance and ran for the front door, heart pounding in my ears. I burst out into the night, screaming for help, praying that someone, anyone, would hear me. But the street was empty, silent, indifferent to my terror. I ran until my lungs burned, not daring to look back. When I finally stopped, gasping for air in a dimly lit park, I realized I had no plan. Where could I go that he wouldn't find me? Who could I turn to when he knew everything about my life? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, my phone buzzed. With shaking hands, I looked at the screen, already knowing what I'd see. "You can run, but you can't hide," the message read. "I'll always find you." And I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that he was right. In that moment, I made a decision. If I couldn't escape him, I'd have to outsmart him. I began to plan, drawing on every scrap of information I had about Jake, both the man I thought I knew and the monster he'd revealed himself to be. It would be dangerous, possibly even fatal if I failed, but it was my only chance. Over the next few weeks, I laid my trap carefully. I played the part of the terrified victim, always looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. All the while, I was gathering evidence, setting up fail-safes, preparing for the final confrontation I knew was coming. And come it did, on a stormy night that seemed crafted for this showdown. As lightning illuminated Jake's face, twisted with a mixture of obsession and rage, I felt an odd sense of calm. This was it, the moment that would determine the rest of my life. As we faced each other, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, I steeled myself for what was to come. One way or another, this night would end the nightmare. But whose nightmare it would be, well, that remained to be seen. I never thought moving to a quiet suburban neighborhood would lead to the most terrifying experience of my life. It all started on a sunny Saturday morning when I was unpacking boxes in my new driveway. That's when I first met him, my neighbor Dave. He approached with a warm smile and an outstretched hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he exclaimed, his enthusiasm seemingly genuine. We chatted for a while, and I felt relieved to have such a friendly face nearby. Over the next few weeks, Dave's presence became a constant in my life. He'd always be outside when I left for work or returned home. At first, I appreciated his attentiveness, thinking he was just being neighborly. But soon, his behavior started to feel off. He'd ask invasive questions about my personal life, my work schedule, and even my dating history. I'd catch glimpses of him watching me through his window, his silhouette barely visible behind the curtains. When I'd wave, he'd quickly disappear from view. One evening, while taking out the trash, I noticed Dave lingering by his mailbox. As I approached, he called out, "Hey, I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime." His eyes gleamed with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I politely declined, making up an excuse about being too busy. That's when I saw it, a flash of anger in his eyes, quickly masked by a forced smile. "No problem," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Another time, perhaps." As I hurried back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of my nightmare. After declining Dave's dinner invitation, I noticed a shift in his behavior. His friendly demeanor morphed into something more sinister. He no longer greeted me with a smile, but instead glared from across the street, his eyes following my every move. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I was overreacting. but the incidents kept piling up. One morning, I found my mailbox stuffed with bizarre love letters, each one more unsettling than the last. They were unsigned, but I knew they were from Dave. Things escalated quickly. I'd wake up to find my garden destroyed, flowers uprooted and strewn across the lawn. My car tires were slashed not once, but 3 times in a single week. Each time I called the police, they'd question Dave, but he always had an alibi. The final straw came when I returned home one day to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I cautiously entered, immediately noticing things out of place. Family photos were turned face down, and my clothes were scattered across the floor. The invasion of privacy left me feeling violated and terrified. As I was about to call the police, I heard a noise from upstairs. Freezing in fear, I listened intently. The creaking of floorboards grew louder, approaching the staircase. In a panic, I bolted out of the house and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as I heard footsteps behind me. I sped away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Dave standing in my driveway, watching me disappear into the distance. I knew then that this was far from over. After the break-in, I couldn't bear to return home. I stayed with a friend, hoping Dave would lose interest if I was gone long enough. But his obsession only grew stronger. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from unknown numbers, all clearly from Dave. "Where are you? Come home. We belong together." Each one sent chills down my spine. I changed my number, but somehow he always found a way to reach me. Weeks passed, and I finally gathered the courage to go back home, accompanied by a police officer. As we approached my house, my jaw dropped. Every inch of my front yard was covered in red roses. At first glance, it might have seemed romantic, but to me, it was a horrifying display of Dave's unhinged fixation. The officer questioned Dave, who claimed it was a welcome home gesture for his dear friend. His eyes never left mine as he spoke, a twisted smile playing on his lips. The police couldn't do anything. Technically, he hadn't broken any laws. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard a tapping at my bedroom window. Peering through the curtains, I saw Dave's face pressed against the glass, his breath fogging up the pane. I screamed and called 911, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The next morning, I found a note taped to my front door. "You can't hide from me," it read. "We're meant to be together, forever." The words made my blood run cold. I realized then that Dave would stop at nothing to be close to me, and I was running out of options. Desperate for help, I reached out to a private investigator. We dug into Dave's past, uncovering a disturbing pattern. He'd done this before, stalking and terrorizing women in different cities, always managing to slip away before facing consequences. Armed with this information, I went to the police again. This time, they took my case more seriously, increasing patrols in the neighborhood and advising me on additional security measures. I installed cameras, changed my locks, and even adopted a large dog for protection. For a while, things seemed to calm down. Dave's presence became less obvious, and I started to relax, thinking maybe he'd finally given up. But I couldn't have been more wrong. One night, I woke up to my dog barking frantically. The security system was blaring, and my phone lit up with alerts. Heart pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat I now kept by my bed and crept downstairs. The sight that greeted me was like something out of a horror movie. My living room was filled with hundreds of photos, all of me. They covered every surface, documenting my life over the past months. There were pictures of me at work, shopping, even sleeping through my bedroom window. In the center of this macabre collage stood Dave, grinning maniacally. "Surprise!" he exclaimed, as if this was some kind of twisted birthday party. "Now we can be together always." He took a step towards me, his eyes wild with obsession. I raised the bat, my voice shaking as I warned him to stay back. Just then, red and blue lights flooded through the windows. The police had arrived, responding to my security system's alert. Dave's face contorted with rage as he realized his plan was falling apart. In a fit of desperation, Dave lunged at me. I swung the bat, connecting with his shoulder. He stumbled back, crashing into the photo-covered wall. As he fell, dozens of images fluttered around him like some sort of deranged snow globe. The police burst through the door, quickly subduing Dave. As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept screaming that we were meant to be together. that he'd find me again. His words echoed in my mind long after he was gone. The aftermath was a blur of police statements, court appearances, and therapy sessions. Dave was sentenced to prison, but the fear he instilled in me lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me, even from behind bars. Months passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and started fresh. But the trauma of what I'd been through stayed with me, manifesting in nightmares and constant paranoia. One day, as I was leaving work, I noticed a familiar-looking man across the street. My heart stopped as he turned, and for a split second I thought it was Dave. It wasn't, of course, just a stranger with a passing resemblance. But that moment of terror made me realize something. Dave might be locked away, but the fear he created would always be a part of me. I've learned to live with this new reality, always looking over my shoulder, always prepared. Because I know that somewhere out there, Dave is counting down the days until his release, nurturing his obsession. And I'll be ready when that day comes, determined never to be a victim again. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I remember it vividly because that's when my life took a terrifying turn. As I sorted through my mail, a plain white envelope caught my eye. No return address, just my name scrawled across the front. Curious, I tore it open, and several glossy photographs spilled out onto my kitchen counter. My heart nearly stopped as I examined them. There I was, walking down Main Street, sipping coffee at my favorite cafe, even leaving work, all captured without my knowledge. The images weren't blurry or taken from afar. They were crisp, clear, as if the photographer had been just feet away. A chill ran down my spine as I realized someone had been following me, documenting my daily routine. I frantically searched the envelope for a note, an explanation, anything, but there was nothing, just the unsettling photos staring back at me. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the day in my mind, trying to remember if I'd seen anyone suspicious, any unfamiliar faces in the crowd. But nothing stood out. Whoever this phantom photographer was, they were good at blending in, remaining unnoticed while they invaded my privacy. The next morning, I debated whether to go to the police. But what would I say? I had no proof of a crime, just a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my life and push me to the brink of sanity. As the days passed, more envelopes appeared in my mailbox. Each one contained new photos, each more intrusive than the last. Images of me through my bedroom window, reading on my couch, even sleeping. The phantom photographer was getting bolder, closer, and I felt utterly helpless. I started changing my routines, taking different routes to work, varying my schedule. But it didn't matter. The photos kept coming, proving that no matter what I did, I couldn't shake my unseen stalker. One evening, I was so paranoid that I decided to stake out my own mailbox. I sat in my car across the street, watching and waiting. Hours ticked by, and just as I was about to give up, I saw a figure approach. Dressed in black, face obscured by a hood, they slipped an envelope into my box and vanished into the shadows before I could react. My hands shook as I retrieved the envelope. Inside was a single photo of me sitting in my car, taken mere moments ago. On the back, written in red ink, were the words, "I see you watching. I'm always watching." That was the breaking point. The next day, I went to the police, bringing all the photos with me. The officers listened, took notes, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They promised to look into it, but without concrete evidence of a threat, there wasn't much they could do. Frustrated and scared, I left the station feeling more alone than ever. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Was the phantom photographer here, even now, capturing my desperation on film? Weeks went by and the photos kept coming, but now they were different. No longer content with simply observing, the phantom photographer began staging scenes. One envelope contained a photo of my toothbrush next to an open bottle of bleach. Another showed my car, driver's side door ajar, with cut brake lines clearly visible. These weren't just invasions of privacy anymore. They were threats. Explicit, terrifying threats that left me paralyzed with fear. I installed security cameras, changed the locks, even hired a private investigator. But nothing seemed to stop the relentless onslaught of photographs. The investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Mike, was baffled. In all my years, he told me, I've never seen anyone this good at staying hidden. His words, meant to be reassuring, only deepened my despair. I began to unravel. Every shadow, every flickering movement in my peripheral vision sent me into a panic. I stopped going out unless absolutely necessary, and even then, I was a nervous wreck. My friends started to worry, but I pushed them away. How could I explain that every moment of my life was being documented by an unseen tormentor? One night, unable to sleep, I sat in my living room with all the lights off, staring out the window. A flash in the darkness caught my eye. Heart pounding, I rushed outside, determined to finally confront my stalker. But the street was empty, silent, except for the distant bark of a dog. As I turned to go back inside, my foot kicked something. There on my front step was a freshly developed photograph. It showed me, standing at my window, taken just seconds ago. On the back, 2 words, "Nice try." The following days blurred together in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. I became a prisoner in my own home, constantly checking and rechecking locks, peering through blinds, jumping at every sound. The photos continued to arrive, each one a reminder that no matter what I did, I couldn't escape. In a desperate attempt to regain control, I decided to turn the tables on my tormentor. I set up my own cameras around the house and began taking photos everywhere I went. If the phantom photographer wanted to play this game, I'd play too. For a while, it seemed to work. The frequency of the stalker's photos decreased, and I felt a small sense of victory. But it was short-lived. One morning, I woke to find my entire living room covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, all of me, taken over the past months. In the center of the room, spelled out with pictures, were the words, "You can't beat me at my own game." I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. How had they gotten in? How had I slept through this invasion? The police were called, but once again they found no evidence of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been there besides me. As the officers left, one of them paused, looking at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. "Are you sure," he asked carefully, "that you're not doing this to yourself?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Was I losing my mind? Had the stress and fear pushed me over the edge? I looked down at my trembling hands, suddenly unsure of everything. Could I trust my own perceptions anymore? The line between reality and nightmare had never felt so blurred. In the days that followed, I questioned everything. Every memory, every photograph, every moment of fear. Was it real, or had I fabricated it all in some twisted delusion? I sought help from a therapist, desperate for answers, for someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. Dr. Simmons listened patiently as I poured out my story. She didn't dismiss me outright, which was a small comfort. Instead, she suggested we work together to uncover the truth, whatever it might be. As part of my therapy, I began keeping a detailed journal, documenting everything. I also started taking my own photos again, but this time not out of paranoia. It was an attempt to reclaim my life, to see the world through my own lens rather than my stalker's. Slowly, tentatively, I began to venture out more. The constant fear was still there, but I refused to let it control me any longer. And then, on a bright Sunday afternoon, it happened. I was snapping pictures in the park when I caught a glimpse of someone familiar, someone I'd seen in the background of many of the stalker's photos. My heart raced as I discreetly followed them, my camera ready. When they turned down a quiet alley, I saw them pull out a professional-grade camera. This was it, the moment of truth. With shaking hands, I raised my own camera and pressed the shutter. The sound echoed in the alley, and the figure whirled around. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I knew. The game was over. The hunter had become the hunted. As I stared into the face of my tormentor, a strange calm washed over me. Whatever happened next, I was no longer the victim. I had taken back control of my story.